So, is the DCU over? Well, before we answer that, let me ask you something. Have you watched the latest episode of Lanterns? Because I did, and quite late at that. And turns out it was the best time to watch it. After the hype had subsided, it turns out it really is a great pilot for a show. If we ignore all the DCU versus MCU, the post Spider Man superhero landscape, the failure of Supergirl to catch enough attention, if we keep all of that aside, what I realized after watching Lanterns, at least the first episode, is that the DCU is not over. In fact, far from it. Now, without beating around the overgrown bush, I just want to jump in and get to the good stuff. When I first heard that they are working on this project, the elevator pitch for the show was pretty much True Detective with superheroes. And then I saw this picture and I thought, well, if that isn't True Detective with superheroes, it definitely is No Country for Old Men with superheroes. And boy, oh boy, has this show captured that vibe. Now, talking about vibes, that's pretty much how I judge comic book content these days. Because to be really honest, my knowledge about comic books is pretty surface level with a hint of curiosity every now and then. So, my reference point for Green Lanterns as a story was whatever I used to watch back in the Justice League animated series. So, pretty much I came with a blank slate. And somehow, without knowing what it should be, this show seems like it is absolutely what it needs to be. Now, could you imagine the superhero show with the space detective premise is somehow set in a small countryside surrounded by the desert? And it feels perfect. And from what I read from some of the interviews the showrunners did, they know exactly what they were doing. Their objective seems to be to take this extreme premise with gigantic proportions and scale and somehow tone it down and ground it. Because when it is so easy for a superhero movie or a TV series to devolve into a CGI fest, wouldn't it be better to bring it back to the basics? So we, the audience, can find the right details and find a sense of relatability. And then, when the stakes are high enough, we ultimately know why we are rooting for these characters. And I don't know, it just this thing with the silence and desert in the backdrop, it somehow makes it more real. Like every dialogue seems like a secret I'm trying to be in on. The best way to describe it would be one of those scenes where there's fog in the background that happens to capture every ray of sunlight that's coming from the window. And while that doesn't really add some thespian flair to the characters, it definitely adds a sense of realism and weight to the scene. And talking about weight, Kyle Chandler's Hal Jordan is holding this show down. He has the right amount of charisma. It isn't too loud, but it is ever present. The overall persona is the been there, done that kind of character. And that works perfectly well for this show for two reasons. One, it sells the character right from the first scene, and two, it adds a great layer of contrast with the other lead, Jon Stewart, who seems so far to be the playing by the books archetype. I keep coming back to how great the script writing is because I personally tend to lose attention. And only when I hear something that's interesting or something that catches me off guard, I tend to rewind 10 seconds and watch it again. And that kept happening in this first episode, where Hal Jordan would keep saying something that I would probably set as my caption back in 2013. Now, credit where credit is due, the showrunners picked a piece of media that is so dense and they're trying to deliver it without exposition. And it seems like they're on the right track. And I can only say it's dense because there's this scene where you find out why Hal Jordan was chosen as the protector of Sector 2814. And that one scene was enough for me to go and read some more about the premise of this series. Now, some people watched this episode and immediately went on the MCU has competition now. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. And I believe that's pretty much the theme for this era of DC content, where every project is gonna be a small step which could go either upwards or downwards, but nevertheless, it gains some momentum. So far, Superman and Peacemaker, at least the first season, were great. Creature Commandos apparently was interesting, but I didn't really get to watching it. And Supergirl was a project that I was really hyped about, considering whatever they gave us before the movie came out, and it looked promising. And I would have watched it if it stayed in theaters near me for more than a week. Anyway, the reviews came out and they panned it. And most of the complaints hinted towards exactly what I talked about in my video, that Supergirl could get everything right, but getting it right isn't gonna be enough. So that's that. But this show feels different. And without feeding my recency bias, I genuinely feel like this project is something that they're putting their heart into. Just the basic things like the shot selection, the spontaneity of the dialogue, leaving enough room for a binge worthy kind of TV series, they are hitting all the right markers. But at this point, it's all up in the air. So far as this episode is concerned, which is the first episode, it's a great piece of content. Now, where they take it from here, it's anyone's guess. Seems like that's pretty much all I have to say. Take it easy. Thanks for watching. Bye.